So their community had been reading it and discussing it and debating it, and it was interesting to hear them talk about this $250 million affordable housing fund that had just passed in Austin. And that was the third. The first one was 50, the second one was 60, this one was $250 million. So it's interesting to see how other municipalities are applying these conversations in their work and in their discussions with elected officials. Because this is a policy roadmap, it's a policy action plan, and that's the core team wants to focus on equity and policy and not get drawn out of those issue areas.
But I will say that we understand that equity needs to be addressed at every level. So it needs to happen at the neighborhood level.
Yes.
It needs to happen at the organizational level. You can't tell somebody else to be equitable if you haven't done your own work. That sometimes causes problems, as we know. So the issue is also making sure that we understand that equity is not something separate from from policy work. It has got to be built in, because you know what? Inequity is baked in right now, everywhere. It's baked in as a part of this country. It has been a part of the history of this country. So that's just to understand that it may not have to do with particular people.
Right.
So we don't necessarily need to get caught up in that particular frame of addressing it. We need to understand that this is institutional, systemic, and it occurs at every level. And so that means that there's a lot of work to be done.
That's right.
It means there's a lot of work, and there's something for everybody to do. So part of the training is how do you talk about equity at the neighborhood level, racial equity at the neighborhood? How do you talk about it in the organization in which you work, in the community in which you live, and then in the systems in which you operate? And so those are questions that we ask ourselves and are asking people who join the coalition to ask themselves.
And the coalition has a set of guiding values because we don't always have the same people at every gathering. So we wanted to just have a ground floor of this is how we're going to treat one another. And one of the guiding values is that we turn the mirror on ourselves and we sit with the discomfort that it creates and not try to deny it and neglect it. So yes, that has been very interesting.
Liz had everything.
Yeah, the idea of policy and most of the recommendations in the report have to do with things that government can do. So do you envision your organization becoming activists or advocates for specific ideas, like a housing trust fund in Cincinnati, or is that just something you're spreading the seeds for and hope somebody else can follow?
Somebody else is actually working on that, and there's progress on it. So we definitely, based on that being a recommendation in this report, want to support that. So affordable housing advocates.
So you would talk with city council and actively speak up for issues like that? I just meant that as an example.
So let's make a distinction between the funders and all in, and the civic leaders and all in. The answer for the civic leaders is yes, and we're in the process of determining how to do that. How will we do that, and operate equitably within the coalition and within the core team. But I would say if you're going to do policy work, there's no way you can avoid that, nor do you necessarily want to avoid it. Organizations might, the separate organizations might. All in can probably have some flexibility in terms of doing exactly that kind of thing, and also applying person bodies to the process, the Army to the process.
Was your question targeted at All In Cincinnati or Greater Cincinnati Foundation?
All in.
Great.
But I understand the caution with the funders.
Yeah. Right.
I guess my observation, and I guess my question is, how do you take a look at the policies and procedures of the institutions or the systems themselves that they present as barriers or have, overlapping expectations for the target population, which in some cases may be very difficult to overcome. Sometimes we're all very nice and weak in this room. We all know each other. We all respect each other, and we love each other. But we're all also part of institutions that have maybe incorporated some of the, like, I guess, what do you call it, values or principles in equity? And how do we,
Of equity
how
or
do you
inequity?
recommend?
Of equity or inequity?
Inequity. I mean, how do you, I guess, suggest or recommend that we kind of have a system to address that?
Yeah, one way we're trying to answer that is the intention to develop an equity toolkit or identify an equity toolkit if there is one that we think is good enough for Cincinnati that does cover hiring and investing and kind of subcontracting. So it's all different areas of your operation. Here are some suggestions and questions for groups to kind of take internally and then work through that and do that in a way that's collaborative and transparent, and then answer back and report out to one another. So yes, most of the recommendations in here are geared toward government, but some of them don't require any sort of sign-off from any sort of elected official. You know, there are policy decisions that a CEO or a business owner can make that influence income and benefits. You know, there's a debate around salary history. Not asking someone their salary history when you're interviewing them, but that's in the report. That's a recommendation from policy that is taking form and taking action. So that doesn't require government action all the time.
But there is an ordinance being proposed for the city of Cincinnati that would require that.
That's right.
And there was something else though. One of the things that GCF has done is brought in a group called the Racial Equity Institute of North Carolina, and they've done several trainings. And Philanthropy Ohio did Putting Racism on the Table.
That's right.
You know, and one of the things the core team wants to do is to make sure that we don't always ask people outside of Cincinnati to come in, but we develop a cadre of those trainers here in Cincinnati so that organizations can use them. My dream is that the funders will fund those from smaller organizations that can't afford it if they need to go past the toolkit. And for those larger organizations, they can purchase that if they really want to make a change, because you do need some help. I think you need some help doing it, particularly if you're a large, fairly complicated organization. It's built in a little deeper. It's built in a little deeper in those situations, and takes a bit more expertise to help the staff do that kind of work.
Yes. And that specific training is something that most of the staff at the Greater Cincinnati Foundation has done. It's a 2-day training around racial equity, which is going back to the beginning of our country and looking at the source of inequity. So if we're going to take this charge on as equity, we need to understand the problem and sit with it and unpack it and personalize it and think about our own lives to it. So yes, it's some of the walking the walk that is necessary, but most of our staff has gone through that. We've had some new hires that haven't gone through it yet. But it has changed the dialogue. It has created a shared language. It does touch our finance and HR and communications and grant making as well. So that's appropriate to lift up that training.
Thank you. I've been, I guess, aware of some of what you were talking about, and I'm gratified to hear how in-depth it is and all of that. But one of the things I've not heard any mention of is the legal aspects of poverty. I hold the opinion that poverty is not haphazard, that it's deliberate and intentional, it's embedded in law. And I'm just wondering how you bring about change if you are not addressing the laws that directs the current policy that produces poverty. If I may, I don't think society is this divided thing with multiple parts. I think society is a whole, and you have all of these component parts. You address one component part, but you're not doing anything about the other. And if I may just another minute. Here's what I'm talking about. Until we address an issue I heard alluded to indirectly, criminal justice reform, we do nothing about how policemen, policewomen, who I think come to this problem at a beginning level with good intentions, but act out in ways that disproportionately impact people of color and poor communities. I'm sure you've heard about the shooting, I forget where now, of this young black man, military veteran, who had a gun, thought he was going to be a good Samaritan and got killed.
Yeah, 21 years old.
Okay, so how do we address this basic evolution in laws in this country that says if an officer of the law even thinks he's in danger, he can shoot you? That's one example. Another example that everybody's familiar with is the laws governing how people vote. We let entities, states, cities in this country propose laws that disenfranchise people of color, poor white seniors, and we do nothing about it. So I don't want to go on, but here is what I'm saying. We're deluding ourselves. If we think we can compartmentally change society and it's going to advance the interests of everybody, we need a holistic plan. And I'm glad to speak more if you want to hear from me.
Yes, man. We live in a city that has an amazing resource at our fingertips. You know, we're all sitting here benefiting from the collaborative agreement. So all this work stands on the shoulders of that, and there's still so much work that needs to be done with that document and that body of work. So there's a direct connection between all in Cincinnati and the collaborative agreement specifically around community policing. It's really interesting when you get outside of Cincinnati and you talk about community policing. You know, they see us as leaders in that area, and that's talking with people who are looking for models to replicate in their city. So thank you for bringing up that point around the connections between this work and the need to lift up and be more clear about legal ramifications.